Welcome to Sustainably Speaking Africa, a podcast about reshaping narratives around sustainability and climate action in Africa. This podcast is brought to you by the Kenya Climate Innovation Centre and is made at Semabox. Join us for this and other episodes as we talk to industry leaders, frontline communities, and the innovators who are accelerating the progress towards a greener, sustainable future. Welcome again to Sustainably Speaking, and as always, please like, share, and subscribe.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We often hear that Africa is at the epicenter of the climate crisis. We often hear that Africa disproportionately suffer from climate change. We often hear that we contribute very little to carbon emissions and suffer the greatest. And that is true. But most of these conversations normally amplify the challenges, the vulnerabilities, the problems. And unfortunately, in many instances, it stops at that. Now, this evening, we wish to present a case that narrative is terribly inadequate. And I'm going to have a panel of leaders in this space as far as communication is concerned, as far as the sustainability conversation is concerned, to help us break this down, to help us demystify this conversation, and hopefully set the stage for a better way to tell the African climate story. Joining me on stage is Arik Karani, the president of PRSK, Public Relations Society of Kenya, as well as APRA. Please join me on stage. Also joining him is Umuliza Njiru, Director of Communication, Policy, Advocacy, Africa at the Rockefeller Foundation. Thank you very much. And last but not least, a development communication specialist or expert, if you wish, William Dekker. Please. Thank you very much. The last panel was quite interesting, and I realized that even the people that we are referring to as last mile audiences are not aware that they're last mile. They do not even know what last mile is. Now we are starting this conversation off what we've just talked about in the previous panel. And the first question I'm throwing to all of you, and I'm hoping that my hypothesis is correct. What do you feel is the gap and the misrepresentation when it comes to telling Africa's climate story on the global stage? And I'll start with you, Arik.
Thanks. That's a very nice place to start. As the head of the African Public Relations Association, I get to be the number one African who tells the African stories, not only in Africa, but across other continents. And I feel the biggest gap we have is that it's not that we are not having innovation or we are not having movement or we are not having product. It's the fact that we are not speaking about what we already have. And if we are speaking about it, we are not speaking about it either in a positive way or in an amplification way. Why do I say this? When I look at Kenya as a country and how far we've come, and when I was listening to the other panel, one thing triggered me when they spoke about waste management. In Africa, when we talk of waste management and how far Kenya has come, you can't compare it to other countries. I guess most times we go to our kitchen and you open the tap and water comes out. You don't know how that water got there. And then you go to the bathroom, you flush the toilet after doing the business, it disappears. You don't know where it goes. if you look at the track record of the country of how we've done waste management and how we've tried to be able to be sustainable, is that we've changed the whole policy and systems, and we've created a lot of treatment works to treat water when it comes to the tap when we are drinking it, and also to treat the seawater that we flush, such that when you flush your seawater nowadays from your bathroom, it goes all the way to a sewer treatment plant. The treatment plant treats that sewer, removes the solid waste. The water is disinfected and cleaned and pumped back into the river to go and be picked by another company that is doing water intake downstream, to be able to also channel it, treat it, and put it back into the households that are downstream. When we look at that whole system and how far Kenya has come, when you go to other countries in in Western Africa and Southern Africa, you realize they don't have that. Why are we not telling that story of how far Kenya has come from the flying toilets of Kibera of 2001, 2002? So there are stories that we probably are taking for granted because we can enter the kitchen, have water flowing the tap, you can go to your bathroom, flush, but you don't know that there's quite a lot of work that has gone into. So unless we start telling these stories for our country and our continent, we will always be referred to as the dark continent that always has to depend on handouts and always has to be funded for items because they just never grow. And so that would be my thinking of where we are.
Thank you very much. Your reactions to that question, Umuliza.
First, thank you very much for giving me the audience, and kudos to everybody. It's an exciting time to be here. So to your question, the first one, in terms of what gap do I see, is that Africa is talked about as if we are one. We are 54 nations, right? Completely independent in the way that we do things. The environment, the topography, the stories from each side, from corner to corner, is completely different. Yet in a lot of platforms, especially in the global north, and when I say global north, so because I understand we're jargon heavy, is everybody north of the equator, or like everybody on the other side, right? All the other continents. They are always in discussion of Africa as if we are one. So I see the gap is that they're not talking about the uniqueness and the complexity and the multifacetedness of Africa, which is a huge disservice for us, right? Another thing is that, again, people discuss about the continent, but they don't have the stories, as Arif is mentioning, about the true realities of what is on the ground. Climate change is a conversation that has been happening in the global north for quite a long time. But we are the ones who have been, if I can say, adapting and mitigating for centuries. On the continent, everybody can tell you it's wetter, it's drier, it's hotter, right? But everybody is using these big words of climate change, right? Motorbikes. So we're talking about like e-mobility. Some people be like, what is that? You know what I mean? But we're talking about pikis, borders. We all understand what this is. And I think the biggest disservice is the fact that one story is being told for the continent. We need to talk about the complexities, the layers, and the ways in which people have adapted. I think one of the entrepreneurs, like now Jesse, who was talking about the e-mobility, right? It doesn't mean that they're not interested to do better. It's just that our problems are that we're trying to find food. We're trying to find school fees. We're trying to find and make sure that our families are taken care of. So unless we deal with the primary issues first, and then we can be like, okay, the complementary aspects is that I'm doing well for the environment, then we can be able to start having a discussion. So I think it's more of my main takeaway, or my main thing is to tell people, let's simplify this conversation so that people can understand why this matters. Why is it that if you mitigate, another big jargon word, against climate change, the fact that, so if we try to move away or try to prevent ourselves from the changes of it being hotter, wetter, drier, there's some economic gains associated with it. So it's not that we are the beneficiaries in terms of we're the patrons, but moving towards a client model that there's an opportunity that you can make money. I think we'll have a huge difference.
Fantastic. You make a very good point, especially on bridging climate action but also economic growth at the same time. But just to hold you on your first thought before I go to William, you talk about the disadvantage of viewing Africa as a unit rather than as 54, 55 independent countries. Where should we draw the line? Because if you look at the European Union, the fact that they go to the discussion tables as a bloc is an advantage. The fact that they can move to different platforms as a bloc is an advantage. For Africa, we don't have that right now. We are basically speaking 54 different countries. Do you think there's an opportunity there for Africa to speak more as one on some of these global issues rather than just as 54 countries to move some of the sustainability and climate action agenda?
Yes. And I'll say a very strong chest to yes. Yeah? The reason I say this is there are fantastic platforms on the continent right now. There's the Africa Climate Summit. There is the Africa Energy Summit. There's so many summits that are happening on the continent. There's the Africa Development Annual Meetings. There's so many events that happen on the continent that we need to move away from developing communiques to actually designing and coming together as a common front. I think if we had one KPI against all organizations is that how do we do things better together, you'd be shocked at the force that would come out of the continent.
Fantastic. To you, Dekker, you sit at the forefront of development communications across different sectors. What are your thoughts on the gap in terms of telling the Africa's climate story or narratives?
Well, I'll pick it from my last takeaway, is that all those stories have never told me that while it's raining and you're riding on an electric motorcycle, you will not get electric shock. If that was told, I would have been a huge fan. Yeah, but probably I'll echo my two co-panelists, Arik and Umuliza, if I pronounce you right, but also condense it into two. You've asked the main gap, but I'll condense it into two, if you allow. The first one is the narrative, and the second one is the position of African communities in that narrative. Yeah. So let me start with the latter. The position of the African communities for the longest time, and you've sort of hinted at it when you're giving a bit of context. So we'll be speaking to this aspect of the African communities are the ones who are disenfranchised with the entire situation. They're the ones who are reeling from the impact of climate change, and they're the ones who are bearing the brunt. You know, those big words, yes? But also they're the ones who are bearing the pain. The reason why this is a huge challenge is because then it takes away power from the African communities who are actually creating the solutions. And Umuliza has just mentioned here, for the longest time, for decades, it's us in Africa who are most of the time adapting, planting trees, doing sustainable farming, fishing, etc., in the right way, in the right models to adapt to those changing situations, right? And so if you had repositioned the African communities as those who are actually the ones coming up with the solutions, adapting, and now even more recently, innovating, then you give rise to a myriad of opportunities. It could be where the financing goes. So if you're talking about climate financing, do you want to finance those who are suffering or those who are providing the solutions first? If you are to prioritize, you'll run to those who are making the solutions, adapting and running with it. And so if the narrative will position the African communities as those, then we give them more power and also take away the narrative of pity, but a bit more on partnership. Now, speaking to narratives, I think I've also highlighted one of the challenges with it is that then we speak to the problem, what is happening. Look at normal risk communication, and I know I'm now entering a different territory. The more you keep talking about the problem, and climate change has always been packaged as this doomsday thing happening, or one day we are all going to be melting because the temperatures are going up, people eventually become numb. And we saw it with COVID, right? So it's like you have a sprint and you have a marathon. Climate change conversations should be approached from the concept of a marathon rather than a sprint, such that we no longer just start speaking to the problem as you do in a quick pandemic, a hurricane, sort of tornado, or some disease that is coming and it's going. Yeah. So you'd want to have communication that speaks to solutions, what can be done, so that I can always say or answer, so what? If you tell me this is the problem, what is my place in the problem? You could tell me how I can reduce the problem or how I can help pivot the problem into a solution. Yeah. So I think those would be probably the main two challenges I see with the current aspect. It's both the narrative and the place of the African communities. Yeah.
Thank you very much, William. So you are saying that if we scare people long enough, they no longer get scared, no matter the actual consequences. And I think generally people hate what they don't understand, and people hate feeling incompetent at the end of the day. To you, Arik, being at the helm of communicators in the continent, you have what I would call a bird's eye view of what's happening. You mentioned earlier the gap. You mentioned what stories we need to be telling more. But we all know that climate change in itself manifests in different contexts, you know. So whose responsibility is it? We have the private sector, we have the government, we have communities, local actors, we have financiers, all these different cadres. Who bears the responsibility in terms of better telling these narratives, and where exactly should we be starting? Where have we missed the point specifically?
I think where we have missed the point is, as Africa, we have not understood what artificial intelligence is. Let me start from there. Artificial intelligence has been around for a long time. And what AI does is that it goes to already established structures and then gets the data and then summarizes it and then gives you, the person who is searching, if you're using whichever, I don't want to plug a company, so whichever site you're using to search, it will gather the data, give it to you. Where we have missed the point is that the world is so fast moving in artificial intelligence in different generations. And in the platforms where we were supposed to have been telling our African stories, let's say, for example, the biggest platform, Wikipedia, we here, all of us in this room and all other Africans watching from all the different continents, have never gone to Wikipedia to tell our own stories. So when you go to Wikipedia, there's stories about Taita, there's stories about Igbo, there's stories about Yoruba people, stories about the North African people is missing. So who writes these stories is folks from North America and European nations who really know the value of getting this information into the data and into the systems, where if someone is searching, they can be able to get a summary. So what that means is that someone else is telling our story. And there are several gaps in that story that they are telling because they are not from this continent. They don't know how far we've advanced. And we are sitting here happy, chilling, chasing after the coin and economics, instead of telling our own stories in platform where we can profile ourselves better. So where did we miss the mark? We missed the mark where we, all of us sitting here, are not contributing to telling our stories in the platforms that are actually generating all this data for AI platforms to give people who are looking for this data. And it's not only the role of the government to do this, the role of private sector, the role of different corporates. It is our own job as a honorary citizen of whichever country I am from Africa to be able to know that the platforms where these big models are getting information from are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And for you to go there and update the story of your tribe, update the story of climate change in your area, update the story of the successes that we are having, the challenges that we've faced, how far we've come as a continent, as a country, as a region for this number of years, so that when the big models are searching for this information to give someone who is sitting in Singapore, someone sitting in Beijing or North America, or even in West Africa, because they want to learn about East Africa, they're easily picked. So we as individual Africans are failing us ourselves because we are not catching up with the world's advancement. We actually don't know that AI has evolved so much that it's governing health, it's governing security, it's governing air infrastructure, and it's also governing climate change and the innovations that are supposed to be here. And as long as we just keep on speaking about it without entering the data in the places where it matters, we will speak for 5-10 years. Our records will never be captured.
And most definitely, that means we can't just be passive users of such platforms and technologies.
Exactly.
To you, Umuliza, you sit at the helm of development in terms of international development, international cooperation. Your work transcends both boardrooms and communities. What is the cost of this misrepresentation or the gap in terms of the narrative around climate change, around sustainability? What is the true cost to communities, to last mile, as we mentioned earlier? What is the true cost of when the stories are not complete? Because storytelling has immense power. What is the true cost of this gap?
I think it's the true cost is lack of representation. And what I mean by that is, as Arif mentioned, it's about the data sets, right? So if data is not being collected, therefore decisions are being made by the information that the powers that be have, right? So by the fact that we are not collecting the right data, decisions are happening above us, through us, around us. Decisions are being made for us as Africans, whereas that should not be the case. I think, and I know, not even I think, I'm absolutely sure, the smartest people I know are the people I've gone to school with, the people I've exposed to, the people I interact with. Africans are really smart, like ridiculously smart. But, right, we're not given the agency or the urgency to take responsibility for some of these things. The people who should be collecting the data are prioritizing other things, right? And even people have not been educated. Like sometimes I always say, people don't know what they don't know. If you don't go and educate someone something, they will move in a different way because they're trying to just survive, right? But I think the disservice there is that a lot of decisions are happening because other people are being given other things to prioritize. So, and I don't even want to talk about others as if, I think we also have to break ourselves from this mindset and the framing of that others are coming to help you. Nobody's coming to help you. You're by yourself. As an individual, you came into this world by yourself, you will live by yourself. And sometimes I think as Africans, the story that been told about our future is somehow dependent on other people. It's not. It's about you, right? So if there's anything that you can do as an individual, even in the work that you're doing, even if it's the research, even if it's speaking out loud, I'm a huge proponent on working out loud. I don't know why someone told us that as Africans we need to be humble. Some are better than others. My Nigerian brothers can tell us, or sisters can tell us, they need to teach the rest of the continent because we move with a lot of humility. And that humility is actually to our demise. So to me, it's more about a lot of decisions are made when people do not have information, and that information is dependent on how people are measuring things from beginning to end.
Thank you. Thank you. Fantastic. Decisions that then finally get to determine the futures of not just the current generations, but many more to come. Dekker, I'll come to you, and this is a direct jab at communicators, especially in corporate spaces, in most of these organizations, and even in media spaces. We produce technical reports. You mentioned earlier about how people get numb at the end of the day when they're bombarded with all these technical terms and all that. We produce reports that are supposed to inspire action, but that don't end up inspiring any action because no one understands them. What must be changed in terms of turning that into narratives that can be understood by communities, can inspire the much needed action? Because many times when we produce most of this content, it's not for our peers. It's supposed to influence policymakers and last mile communities. What should change?
Thank you, Tobias. I could respond in a very short and sweet way. like back to basics, or I'll be a bit more elaborate to bring in the entire audience into the actual discussion, yeah? And I'll start from something more current, part of what they call the UNAT transformation. The SecGen released, I mean, there was a report that was released and it said 80% of UN reports are never read, yeah? Which is actually funny, because if those reports are meant to be technical reports, which means they go to technical stakeholders, policymakers, and then those people make decisions, and we can contextualize it in any way. We can take climate change, we can take health. And we say one of the reports were probably recommending that you should probably vaccinate X number of kids in a certain population so that they get better. But then that report is never read. So it means that decision is never implemented. Then what happens? Then you see the health dwindling, right? So there's always a huge aspect to how our narratives should come out so that they influence decision making. Now, back to basics. Allow me to take the audience back to very ancient times, because you've asked a communication question, and how communication has evolved is drawing from the fields of sociology and philosophy, and more importantly, development communication that you're angling on. And we find a guy called Aristotle, several years BC. I don't know what BC Arik will tell me. Is it before Common Era? Yes. Probably about 350, 400 BC. Aristotle. It gives us a nice concept called pathos, ethos, and logos. Somewhat it disappears, and I'll tell you what pathos, ethos, and logos are. If we picked it from BCE, and you can call BCE whichever terminology before Christ, to date, that concept will still work. Pathos, ethos, and logos is a persuasion model when you communicate and people actually take action. So you appeal to emotions, you appeal to facts, and of course, your credibility, which is the ethos. Pathos is the emotions. And then, which one have I left? The logic one, right? So you realize that most of the reports we produce, we largely appeal to two things. Credibility. We as KCIC hereby have found that 80% of young innovators do not get funding. Hogwash, not to KCIC, but to the narrative, because we are only putting facts and we are sounding KCIC because we are the authority.
Yeah.
We as PRSK have noted that communicators do not reach out to the right audiences. Again, hogwash. Yes, it's PRSK, and then you're very credible and you're actually using facts as they are. But ideally, you are missing the concept of pathos, the emotions, appealing to emotions. If I weaved in a concept to it, and let's give a normal statistics we use, and you used it even here, that Africa bears the brunt of the climate change burden, yet we only produce 4% of global emissions. It's a very nice hogwash statement. But if I converted an emotional appeal and said, because of the changing weather patterns, we can see that now mosquitoes are moving from places that they did not used to occur. I mean, they're moving from places that they used to be, for example, at the lake region, and now we are seeing them in the cities where we never used to see them because the climate is getting warmer. And so if you go to Kibera now, you'll find that more mothers are actually experiencing fevers. I mean, seeing their kids experiencing fevers, but they can't tell what it is. So the first thing they do is they go look for headaches. They give the kid thinking it's just a normal fever, maybe out of any other thing. And then because these kids are not diagnosed for malaria, which they wouldn't have thought of, we see more mortality, big word. We see more kids actually dying in a place like Kibera, and they will never get to know the answer. Did that not appeal to you? I created that out of the thin air. But in reality, it's an emotional appeal, right?
Yeah.
So I think going back to basics, looking at what persuasive communication will do, and in the context of climate change. Other elements of persuasive communication is empowering you to know what you can actually do. I highlight the problem. Yes, we bear the brunt, we suffer, the glaciers are melting, etc. Facts we cannot discard. But then I come to the ground and I tell you what can be done. And then I tell you, Mazi is innovating. Now they're using electric motorcycles, etc. And I journey with you through the story of one border rider who has reduced his own carbon emissions when he switched. And I journey with him. I tell you how much more he's making, 60%. Take us to the actual representation of what that 60% is, so that I can see now his family can afford fish. I love fish. You can find it in my accent, right? So tell us that now they can afford more fish twice or thrice a week. And before, their plate was largely carbohydrates, githeri, uji, rabuoni, etc. Right? So I can literally see you journey with me in the narrative, and the numbers are actually telling something. So on one end, you've told me about carbon emissions, but also to what matters to me, which has also been mentioned here. I can see that his economic status, big word, has actually improved. Journey with him for another year. Let's see, his kids are now actually going to good schools, and they're wearing good uniform, and they're healthy, and disease has reduced. I think that kind of storytelling is super powerful, because if an investor is looking at it, then they see this is actual impact. Communicators, we usually move more towards outputs, and largely for some people, outcome, or just the input. We produced this number of press releases. We produced 8 episodes of this podcast. KCIC, no harm. We produced 8 podcasts. So what if you produced 8 podcasts? That is an output, right? But if we moved more towards telling the impact, it means we will start telling what matters, because I'll be telling you how this border rider who has embraced low carbon emissions is actually changing the lives of his family, but also of the wider society. I think that summarizes back to basics for me.
Fantastic. That was a masterclass. You should clap. Thank you very much. So not just storytelling that focuses on facts and figures and percentages and emissions, but rooted on what affects people. So emotional appeal, talking to them in a language they understand, and most importantly, having the audience in mind. Did I get that correct?
Absolutely.
Now, to my audience, on that
You're clearly
topic-
having them in mind.
Yes. On that topic of audience, we've had a lot on the gap. We've had what needs to be done. And I know even still, as we continue with this conversation, there are certain aspects, there are certain points that we are still missing. We've had people talk about climate change. We've had people talk about sustainability. But for many people, this manifests in different ways. It manifests in low yields. It manifests in low numbers when it comes to tourism. It manifests in waste and all that. I'm curious to hear, how better do you want to see these stories told? Any pointers, any suggestions? How better should these stories be told in a language?
Can I ask a question first before you go ahead?
Yes.
When you talk about sustainability, what are you talking about? I'm challenging some of these jargons that you use on this stage.
Well, sustainability, if I can explain it in simple terms, is basically exploiting the resources that are available to you today. I know you're going to tell me to explain resources. Thinking about not just today, but also tomorrow. Thinking beyond the current moment. Thinking long term. What happens after I'm gone? What happens to my children? What happens to the next generations? So while I can get X amount of profit today, but what does this mean to people? What does this mean to the environment? How do I ensure that I do not deplete at the expense of the person that comes after me? Did I get it?
A plus.
Thank you. Any input, any insights from the audience on how better can we tell these stories? This is your chance to be a panelist. If I don't get any takers, I will. If you're looking at me or looking down, I will single you out. Any takers?
Cleophas is trying hard to look
Yes,
down.
Cleophas. Yeah, you look like you're thinking about something brilliant.
Thank you for the opportunity. I'm Cleophas. And such a wonderful presentation from the panelists. There's a point that I think we'll all need to avoid generalized storytelling that we'll be having. Currently, we are speaking of Lake Bogoria and Lake Baringo about to mix and having salty waters of Bogoria mixing with Baringo and bringing the hazard to the community. How can we tell the story of Turkana residents facing drought, specifically to them, and differently from those around Lake Victoria or Lake Baringo struggling with the rising water levels, separately, to ensure that each and every person in that community gets to understand what's happening around them. We have those who are displaced as we speak. And so generalizing the message is generally ineffective, and it's not helping at all. And also, it fails to provide that context-specific explanation to the concerned residents. And also, if we speak of actionable information that we need, I would concur with the panelists who mentioned the need to have this information directed to either the donors, the sponsors, those who are going to drive this change from above, and not the last mile. You see, the last mile conversation that we've had, I thank the organizers of this event. At least some of us here only had last mile connectivity through electricity and not through the climate actions that we're supposed to have the ripple effect of everything where it's trickling down. So having the narrative passed in a manner that can be consumed by our regions and also the audiences that really have these stories matter to them.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Any last submission from the audience before we come back to conclude? Yes, give the mic to the gentleman here.
Good evening, everyone.
You can stand.
We could change the way we tell the climate story. Rather than having data and graphs, we can have real life entities. Like, for example, if it affects a fisherman, let's follow the fisherman and see what challenges he faces. If it's a border rider, let's follow him around and see what changes. And also, yeah, that's it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I hope I've not left anyone out.
There's someone behind you.
Yes, the mic here. Why am I not getting any contributions from ladies in the room? Noella, I'll die with you.
Good evening, everyone. Fantastic panel that we've had this evening. A question that I'd like to shoot directly to Madam. Sorry, I'm very terrible with names.
It's okay, you can call me Umu. Umu, yes.
You alluded to how, other than Nigerians and other countries, say Kenya is a direct example of entrepreneurs that are typically very humble. What are the ways that you would use to embolden entrepreneurs to come out with their stories? Because one of the key impacts of being emboldened in Kenya is that you then get hounded by the authorities in as far as compliance goes and everything else. So that's what makes people really have these subtle success stories, or even not just success stories, but struggles that they fight with underneath everything else, and it will only bubble up when either they make a very big success of themselves or a big failure of themselves. So how, as communicators, do you suppose you would embolden entrepreneurs to open up with their stories? And because what I feel is that by opening up, they then cause a domino effect in creating courage among others that are fighting to make successes of themselves. Does that make sense as a question?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And when you'll be answering that question, you have to explain domino effect and what it means.
Okay.
Now, this is exactly why we are having this conversation. This is exactly why the Kenya Climate Innovation Center is pioneering this platform, Sustainably Speaking Africa, as a podcast that seeks to amplify African narratives of change, to have a platform where we can reshape the conversation, to not just look at problems, but also look at possibilities, look at opportunities, and talk about it in a solutions-oriented perspective, rather than just from a problems perspective. As we conclude this panel, and I know you have a question to answer, but as we conclude this panel, what are your thoughts on how best this platform can be shaped in telling these stories, in bridging this gap, and how we can partner with all the other platforms that currently exist, both digital, traditional media, and all that, to at least come up with a centralized place of having these narratives as a critical first step for the continent. I'll start with you, Dekker, briefly.
Thank you. I'll respond to that, but I also picked up tidbits of what Cleophas mentioned, and my colleague partially responded so well about Turkana and everything else. Probably just adding one component, and it also ties to my final sentiment. In development communication or solutions-oriented communication, there's a concept we call, big word, agency. And so having the person at the community not just speaking, but also we see his role as being able to create change. So that empowering aspect to it, that is one. So take somebody in Turkana and the one you want to tell them about climate change effect on them. The person in Turkana exists in an ecosystem. And within that ecosystem, there's a graph of influence or a chart of influence. They have community elders, they have people they listen to, even just the same way in an household. Even you have people you listen to. Now, compare this to where that person in Turkana is just a case study in somebody's documentary, and that somebody is domiciled somewhere in the far north. As opposed to this person listening on the radio station to one of the village elders speaking to their own actual challenges, which they can all relate to, and then also speaking to what they can do. I think it has a much more powerful influence as opposed to the converse. And of course, the other part of it, he mentioned it, just follow the fisherman, just follow the border rider. Now, my final sentiments, and I know I'm saying a lot of things, is how do we tell these stories better? I think let's transfer the power of the narrative to the communities. And we hope to see that also reflected here in the podcast. Who is sitting on this panel? Is it William Dekker seated in a nice suit? Arik in his nice African attire I would never beat and speaking to a global perspective. Or Umu here, and you kept introducing the titles and everything. Well, it speaks nicely that, yes, we could add a bit of flesh to the discussion, but I think for future conversations, and probably I'm already preempting what's already in those podcasts, it will actually be nice to see the actual communities, people who you'd call at the very margins of the impact, being the one who say their narrative. I think that will change a couple of things. It will change where they're placed and who comes in as a supporter, as a partner, not somebody pitting them when they're being seen in another documentary. And lastly, I'd said last, but I think lastly is because you just mentioned, Cleophas hinted, that when you target the people, you mentioned start from the top, the donors and everything. Makes sense, yes, but I think we are a whole ecosystem. Yes, target the donors, they have the message that works for them, that Africa is ripe for partnerships in climate financing, solutions financing, etc. That is their message. We don't forget them, but also come to the communities so that theirs is also solutions-oriented messaging. What can you do within your power? So everybody in the entire value chain is not left out with the messaging. Thank you.
Okay, fantastic. I'll start with what Cleophas had asked in terms of how do we tell these stories. First, I think we need to stop being prescriptive. What I mean by prescriptive is, can you imagine someone coming to your house, your home? Just imagine your home, and they enter your home, they sit in your living room, and they tell you, we need to paint this living room pink. We need to change these chairs because the problem is your seats are uncomfortable. We need to change the food you're having to now, instead of eating ugali, you're going to start eating sushi, right? You'd be
right.
like, okay, wow, who gave you that audacity, right? You understand, right? So we need to first stop thinking that we are the ones who have the answers. I have never seen anybody who has a problem who doesn't have their own solution. A lot of the times it's just that they've not been given the opportunity to develop their own solution. So I think one, we have to, I'm going to use a big word, we have to do participatory engagement. And what that means is that we have to have a dialogue. Where I remember in university, one of my lecturers once told me, or told us, but in class, you're the only student, leave your shoes at the door. And what that meant is that in any environment that you go into, really understand that you're entering with a sense of humility and you're coming in to be supportive, to be a partner. It's not that you're coming in to aid. And this is a framing, and it's very important about the way we have to reframe the way we talk to ourselves, that someone is coming to help you. It's more of a conversation of how can I support you to get to where you're going? Because you have the answer. And if you go to the community in Turukana, I can tell you 100% they know what the solutions are. They just need to talk amongst themselves. Give them that platform, give them the convening power. Let them sit and make a decision for themselves and enable them or be that catalyst that can help support them, and they can be able to find their answers. To the person, the gentleman who was asking about us telling the story of walking with someone, you said we should walk with them to find out their problem. But why can't we walk with them to see their strength, their ability, their heroes? I have never seen anybody who does not wake up in the morning and is not striving for them to be the best version of themselves. We need to start thinking about things in dignity, right? There's no one person who is better than another. If you cut me, my friend, I'm going to bleed. If you cut him, you're going to bleed. There's no difference. And I think we need to stop with the narrative of always thinking that it's, oh, I'm a problem. We're having this discussion amongst the panelists. And I was like, when was the last time you had someone say, I'm doing well? Everybody always starts with this thing of I'm suffering, my problems. No one will ever tell you, my friend, I'm okay.
Kujaribu tu.
Yeah, you understand. It's this mindset that we have, right? And I can tell you 5 years ago who you are, 10 years ago who you are, you've gone up, you've improved yourself, right? And we have to start having that humility of walking with people and understanding that they're strong, right? There's things that we can learn about how someone has adapted. That fisherman has adapted. He's, instead of using maybe tools that he doesn't have access to, he's being innovative. Like some of the most amazing innovations I've seen by people who have limited resources, and people are very innovative. So I think we also have to think about the way that we frame these conversations so that people are their own heroes. Again, I come back to nobody's coming to save you. You are the champion, right? And then to the gentleman who was asking me the direct question about entrepreneurs and how they can tell their story better. Okay, fast. When did you start talking? Genuinely, right? You started talking when you're how old? Give me an age, guys. How old were you? Huh? Right? All these years you've been communicating. All these years. Communicating is not that hard. I have my dad is an academician, right? So he's a very serious PhD fellow who, when I told him I want to do communications, he asked me, surely, you've been doing this since the day you were born. Why would you go to school to do this, right? But I can tell you every day I can see how people are not communicating, right? Because everybody just assumes something. So to me, I think one thing is it's not such a big challenge, just working out loud. As an entrepreneur, even talking about your daily trials and tribulations, your wins, your successes, the things that motivate you is a story. Start easy. Get a LinkedIn account, do a logo, decide what the story you're going to talk about this month. And it could be the wins and the abilities of the people in my team. you're going to start talking. That in itself is talking about a theme, right? It's not that hard, and there's so many people and there's so many resources out there that can be helpful. But I really urge people to not think that communicating is very hard. There's an individual that I had I had a conversation with a couple of weeks ago, and she started her conversation. They started the discussion with, I'm sorry, but I stutter and I don't communicate very well, but I'd like to tell you my story. She spoke for a whole 10 minutes and she was the most articulate individual I had ever met. She was very clear with her message. She knew exactly what she was trying to achieve, but someone somewhere had told her that she was inadequate because she could stammer, and she never stammered. So I think we also have to be careful about the story we tell ourselves, because it starts from within, and you'd be shocked at the power that you would have by just telling a simple story. Thanks.
Absolutely. The power of a simple story. No one is coming to save us. And autonomy, making sure that people can tell their own stories. Arik, your concluding thoughts as the global, as Dekker called it.
Well, he looks global still. Yeah.
On that note, ningependa tubadilishe huu mjadala kutoka kwa lugha ya Kiingereza tuje kwa lugha ya Kiswahili, au sio?
Naam.
Mnaonaje? Hawa ndugu zetu kutoka mkoa wa Nyanza hawatupeleki vizuri, si ndio? Vijana ria. I have the people. Be careful. So, how can you do this better? I think it's a fusion of everyone. You have 3 seats as guests. Have a policy person who's sitting up there, have a local person, and then have someone to tell a story, the story of that panel from different regions. That is going to be very effective. As I say that, and I love the story of the famine that was mentioned in northern Kenya. One of the ways that you can also make sure that this podcast becomes popular is to have various challenges. One challenge is to look at something like World Water Day, which is March 22. And the famine is in Turkana. Why are we not lobbying, or you lobby, the Ministry of Water and Sanitation and Irrigation, and which houses environment and all those things, to have that celebration in Turkana for those 4 days and have all government officials in there, in that heat, without water? I assure you, if you take on a challenge like that and you support and you get them there, you will have a drastic change in how everybody is viewing farming and life in Turkana, and people will be looking and speaking with communities to find out what is the best solution to solve it. And the other challenge is, as you do your podcast, is interact with everyone here. I think the first panel, when I had Ernest speak and Jesse speak, it was a highlight bulb moment for me. I actually didn't know about sustainability and moving into these green spaces until my best friend, who I came with, who's one of the renowned lawyers in this country, who doesn't like that I'm doing this, but he's here with me, built a very beautiful house. And he made his house so interesting because he put solar panels, he did everything that is eco-friendly. His bulbs are working. They're not like mine with electricity. And so one time I was like, Sijao Galeo, you know, why? I said, I don't have electricity. He said, why? I don't run my house with electricity. My entire house is run by solar panels. Such stories or challenges of us telling stories of our friends and how they're innovating their spaces to look at climate solutions at local levels, at peer levels, and having us tell the story of our individual cases, and you highlighting the best story and probably giving an award is one way of us being able to tell stories peer to peer that are changing narratives, and that all of us can be able to figure out and go and learn from us. How did he do his house? I'm now learning how he's doing his so that I can make my house cool like his. And so those are some of the things I think you can do to make the podcast better. And the last one, the challenge you should do, I think, you should organize real life as you're doing your podcasting. You can partner with the biggest community in Kenya, the Wikipedia community that puts the content on the net, to come and do a live teaching for all the public to edit stuff into Wikipedia. And you do it live as you do the podcasting. At the end of the day, our stories, as long as they're not resting in an interface in one of the big platforms, they are just our stories. And once we die, they die with us. Mazi Mobility will die if, and knock on wood, I don't want you to die though. But you see, but if he puts it in a platform where people can grow to edit and keep it there live, in terms of how he started his success story, for other inventors to come in 10, 15, 20 years later and want to learn from something, or someone who is a donor from wherever he's sitting and looking for how best to invest in Africa and in Kenya, it's easier to get it. So if you can have practical tips like those, they will be very fruitful for the podcast and for us as challengers. Just make sure you, if I win the prize, you take me to maybe Paris or something like that. Amasio. Alafu.
Asante sana kaka Arik.
Tobias, I realize I didn't answer the last part about what you could do. May I?
Yes. Okay.
For the podcast. I think it would be a great opportunity for you to take this podcast on the road. What I mean by that is I referenced the Africa Climate Summit. There's the Africa Food Systems Summit. There's the Africa Development Bank annual meetings. All these meetings happen on the continent and they all talk about climate. I think it would be fantastic if you could humanize some of these discussions. Basically say, what did all these guys say? Like, why does this matter? Why should I care? Right? I think that would be a fantastic way of getting first individuals who may not have the platform to have access to some of these big platforms, and also to be somewhat of a evaluator of some of the discussions. Like, as William mentioned, there's a lot of big words that are said, but what is actually the impact, not the outcome of some of these discussions? I think it would be very fantastic.
Thank you so much. And to the panel, thank you very much for your insights. Thank you for your expertise, and for a fantastic audience. Thank you very much. What's very clear from this conversation is that reshaping Africa's climate narrative is not just a communication imperative. It goes to economic, it goes political, it goes social, and it is very critical that it is told with depth, it is told with authenticity. Sustainably speaking, Africa will do its best to rise to the challenge in terms of creating a platform that can centralize this conversation, in terms of creating a platform that can bridge innovations, possibilities with opportunities, and to catalyze the collaboration and action that is needed. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for your insights. Santeni sana.
Asante.